Alright, this one's for Lance MacCarty. Um, so this is his set for everything to look kind of unique. The foremost thing that I would say right off the bat is, let me just create a clone of this. The first and foremost thing I would say right off the bat is you want to get a better value system going on. And what I mean by that is if you grab a new layer and just put that layer to, not multiply, overlay, you say OK. And then we just take the solid black and fill that layer. No, sorry, not overlay. We want it as, I gotta remember this one, saturation. And what saturation does is basically, or you can do hue too, and what that does is basically takes out all of your color information and leaves you with grayscale. So by doing this, we can already see where we have issues with value not being dark enough. I would say, in here, this area here would be a place to kind of put it. Let me just grab a different brush here because there we go. Okay, so this area here is a place that's not very dark. This here is not very dark. Things like that. I would expect more brightness and lights out of this, and I would also darken these. And I think that's going to help out, and then give me a light, more shadow here, and then I would expect these to be darker, thus making this brighter. So those are things that I would just do with that aspect. So really quickly from that standpoint, what I would say is, if you're doing this, then darkening up. You see how just that little bit makes that hole pop a little bit more, even though it's a blunderbuss. You still get that nice shading in there, and it pops it out a little bit more. And if you want this light, you have to, I would say, darken. So if I'm just going to do this as a multiply layer just real quick. So by darkening this, your contrast gets a little bit better and it looks much more interesting. Same thing on this side here. If we're going for an underside, darken, and I'm just using some of the mid-tone blue to kind of give you that idea. I'm not really paying attention here, but you see by doing this, by darkening the underside, you're actually giving more depth and tone and value to your piece, your initial piece. Same thing here. Give me more darks in the gem, and then you want the same thing highlights too. I'm just kind of if you want the underside lighting, you see how just by doing this simple underside lighting is adding a lot more interesting shadows. Things like that. And then you can go in and erase the parts that you want to make it pop. So that's the first thing I would say right off the bat is just get darker tones in there. And then the next thing I would say is that you want to, you have highlights in there, but you really want to have a little bit more textured highlights. So right now this metal is just solid metal. Everything's kind of that same effect and feel. Now if I grab, I'm just looking at my brushes here. So if I grab something like this, add a little bit of spacing, I'm going to just angle this up a little bit, maybe even a little bit of size jitter, possibly some roundness. So now I've got this. I'm going to pick this highlight color, and just by adding, oh, I got to do one that's not in the multiply layer. So just by adding this little bit of texture to your layer. It's a little bit of a grain, but it adds just enough texture to the outer side that it makes it look a little bit more riveted now and a little bit more interesting. So things like that, just adding little textures like that in there, is going to really help push the idea of what you're trying to portray. Same thing as this here. If you want to go a little bit darker, and I would just do it in the, just do a shadow, and so I've got my shadow in there like so, but then go in with an eraser and clean up your texture pattern like so. And it sounds simple, but it adds a little bit more realism to your entire piece. A little bit more texture adds a little bit more complexity to your idea. Now, the other aspect is these are older devices, very steampunk style, and so what you want to do is you want to almost add a little bit more grit and dirt in there, and that's where you come in here and go back in our brush here, and I'm on my overlay layer mode. Now, you don't want to add too much in there, like so, but when we go in and on the smooth sides here, you can start by taking some of that, and what that's doing is that's adding that little bit of grit and grain, where things kind of don't ever really get cleaned in the corners, things like that. And it's just little things like that'll add the subtle texture to it. Another thing is, if you're going on your gem here, if you're going super bright, then go to solid white. Don't mess around with the subtle colors. So your highlights are your highlights like this. And then what I would do is, because this is a new layer, I would just say and then with the eraser tool take out what we don't need, and that's just going to add oops, that's a little bit too much, but that's going to add that bright reflection that you want to get. So on your gems and stuff, don't be afraid to go super dark and super light. There's a high contrast value in there. So those are things that I would change overall. I think you have some decent ideas. Just pay attention to things like I look at the gun here, and overall, just with a bigger color here. So overall with the gun, what I would say is watch the straightness of the gun. I know you're doing a blunderbuss, but when you draw a straight line like so, this is the way the gun would actually feel. But as you can see, because you drew that off center, now it looks a little bit kind of off. So your center hole would actually come here, and then everything would match on top of it. So it's just, and that the gun looks a little bent, but otherwise, like I said, you have a decent idea going on. You just need to add that secondary and a little bit of texture, a little bit of grime, dirt, that type of thing to kind of make it look a little bit more interesting. All right, I hope that helps.